Hey Cheva, what's going on? Welcome back to Babel on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Tes of Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 19. We continue with our agadatas that we began yesterday, and that will take us pretty much through the first Amud, and then we get back to pasei bayraos. And we go into a little bit more detail about the dimensions of pasei bayraos, and then we begin a series of, I believe, a total of 8 questions that Abai asks his teacher, Rabbah. We get through, I think, 4 of them on this stuff. Cool. Well, let's jump in. We are on Daf Yud Tes Amud Aleph all the way at the top. Come and see that the ways of God are not like the ways of people. When it comes to people, like in the general ways of things, so you have a king and you have a nudnik. The nudnik does something problematic, so we gotta eliminate him, kill him l'maisa. So what we do is we take some kind of thing and prop this fellow's mouth open, the nudnik, because by doing that, then he won't be able to talk. Because we're concerned that if he talks, then he might say some unpleasant things against the king, who just decreed that we gotta kill him. So, Kadesh lo yikalas hamelech. So basically, when it comes to kings and nudniks, so when the nudnik is chayiv misa, you gotta make sure that he doesn't do any talking, because he's probably gonna do some cursing. Whereas Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when it comes to God, if you have a fellow who does something that now we got to eliminate this fellow, Shosek, he is quiet when he sins against God. As it says in the context of people sinning, in the context of God, it says that for you, quiet is praise. Not only is this fellow who's chayiv misa, does he keep quiet, he even praises God. So it says praise. Not only that, he accepts his yisurin me'ahava, and says if he's offering a sacrifice, as the pasuk says, right? The continuation of that same pasuk of the chadumya tehila, it says l'cha yushulam neder, that you will be paid a neder, like a korban. When a person makes a neder, that he's going to bring a korban. Okay, fine. So that's a stark difference between somebody who's chayiv misa from a king of flesh and blood and somebody who's chayiv misa from God. When you chayiv misa from God, you kind of keep quiet and accept it upon yourself. And this is what Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, what is the pasuk? It says, those who pass through the valley of bacha, of confusion, of tears, Maya Yishisuhu, and they give him a so basically the Metzudas David understands this pasuk in a very beautiful way, which is very different than how the Gemara is going to explain it. So I'll just explain it in terms of pshat from the Metzudas David, and then we'll see how the Gemara has fun with it. But over B'emek HaBacha, so interestingly, Emek HaBacha is a reference to this area when people would have to travel to Jerusalem for the regalim. So there was this very difficult area where there wasn't much water or anything like that. It was like desert kind of area. So people would pass through this area, Ma'ayan Yishisu, and God would provide them with Ma'ayanot, with springs. Gam Brachos Yai Temora, and if there was a person there who knew the way and could instruct them how to travel, so then that person would get lots of blessings because everyone would bless him for helping them out. Now, Rabbi Shua ben Levi makes like a drasha from this pasuk. He says, Ovrei elu b'nei adam she'ofen haratzon shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ovrei refers to those people who transgress the will of God. Emek, what does it mean? Emek shma'amikin loim gehenim oy va'avoy, that they make hell nice and deep for these nudniks. Habacha shebochin u'moridin demos, and habacha means that they cry. So these people who we got to throw them into a really deep part of hell. So they cry about it. They feel bad. They do tshuva. K'mayin shel shisin, like the spring of the shitin where they sing the mizbeach, that they would pour the like nisuch hayayin and nisuch hamayim down the shitin. So they would basically, these chevra, they would cry tears, like the liquids that would go down the shitin from the mizbeach. Kam brachos yai temora And they also offer blessings to the moreh, I don't know, the person giving the rules over here, that's basically saying that they're chayiv misa, that they're matzdikin aleim as a din, that they accept upon themselves the din that they have to go to the deepest parts of hell. And they say before God, Ribono shel olam, Master of the world, Yafeh danta, you judged properly. Yafeh zachisa, you have made innocent properly. Yafeh chayafta, you have made guilty properly. V'yafeh takanta gehenim l'rishayim, and you have properly fixed hell for the evildoers. Gan eden l'tzadikim, and paradise for the righteous chevra. So 1 second. So we see that when it comes to people that are chayiv misa b'dei shamayim, so they accept upon themselves the din, even if they're going to have to go to hell. Now, is this really true? But 1 second, Rish Lakish said that Rishayim, they don't even do tshuva when they are on the threshold of hell. Meaning over here, we see that this fellow needs to go to hell, yet he's accepting upon himself his predicament. But I thought the Rish Lakish says that the Rishayim, they don't accept upon themselves their predicament, they don't do tshuva, even when they're mamish sweating on the threshold of hell. Shneimar, as the Apostle says, V'yatzu v'ro b'figure anosh maposhim b'vigomer. Right, in the context of Gog and Magog, it says that all the nations of the world who come to Yerushalayim, they're going to look out and see the corpses of those people of Gog and Magog that are sinning against me, meaning they're already dead, yet it says that they're sinning against God. Shepashu lo ne'amar ela aposhim. Right, it doesn't say that they're going to look out on the corpses of these chevra that sinned against God. Rather, they're going to look out on the corpses of these chevra that are sinning against God, even once they're dead. Sheposhim b'holchin la'olam. That they just continue to sin, and this means even on the doorway to hell, they refuse to do tshuva. So, meaning on the one hand, we're saying that when somebody's chayiv misa b'dei shamayim, so they accept upon themselves the judgment. Yet we seem to, Rish Lakish says that the Rishayim, when they're not even on the threshold of Gehenim, they do not repent. Lokasha b'poshe Yisrael b'poshe ovdei kochavim. So it depends. If they are Jewish sinners, well then they accept upon themselves the din and they do tshuva. But if they are Gentile sinners, well then even on the doorway to hell, they are adamant that they will not repent. This also makes sense to explain Rish Lakish's statement about the people who don't do tshuva even by the threshold of hell to be referring to Gentiles, because the imkain kasha Rish Lakish, because if you do not explain it this way, well then we're going to run into trouble with another statement of Rish Lakish, which is Dam Rish Lakish Poshe Yisrael ein ur gehenim sholetes bain, that the Jewish sinners, the fires of hell do not affect them. Kavachomer mimizbeach hazav, and we can learn that out from a kavachomer from the golden altar. Mamizbeach hazav she'ein olav ela ka'ovi dinar zav. Right, the golden altar. There's only like the thickness of a gold coin worth of. There's only the thickness of a coin's worth of gold. Amad kamashanim v'loshata bo haor. And yet, even with such little amounts of gold surrounding it, it was able to stand against this intense heat of the altar for all of those years. Well, the sinners of Israel that are filled with mitzvos like a pomegranate, that your forehead is like the crown of a pomegranate. Says Rish Lakish, don't read it crown, rather read it, don't read it forehead, rather read it emptiness. That even those among you who are empty are really not very empty. They're nonetheless filled with mitzvos, like a pomegranate is filled with juicy, delicious seeds. So then certainly they should be able to stand up to the fires of hell. So on the one hand we see Rish Lakish saying that the sinners do not even repent on the door, on the threshold of hell. Yet, on the other hand, Rish Lakish also says that the fires of hell do not have any effect on Jewish sinners. So what's the deal? So we say, well, the first one where we said that they don't repent even on the doorways of hell is actually not referring to Jewish sinners, it's referring to Gentile sinners. Well then, if that's the case, what do we do with that pasuk, that drasha of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi about the fellows who have to go to hell, the deepest parts of hell, and they accept it upon themselves, but Rish Lakish said that hell doesn't affect the Jewish sinners. So that pasuk that talks about these people who have to go to the deepest parts of hell, so that is talking about somebody who at that point in time needs to go to the deepest parts of hell. However, then at the last minute, b'daka tishim, in the very last minute, Avram Avinu comes, umasiklu, and he takes him out from hell, umakabalu, and he accepts this fellow. The only exception being if you have a Jewish boy who sleeps with a non-Jewish girl and she pulls back his foreskin so that he no longer has a bris milah, and then Avram Avinu can no longer identify him and he gets stuck there in hell. Okay. Maskefla Rav Kahana. So now Rav Kahana asks a question. Hashadama taposhim depashe va'azle. Now, so Rav Kahana says, look, Rish Lakish, if you're explaining haposhim as referring to those who, even after their death, they continue to sin, right? Because it says poshim is present tense. So, one second, the pasuk says, hamotzi eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim, and it also says hama'aleh eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim, right? Does that mean that God is still taking us out of Egypt? No, el da'asik va'apik. No, it means that God took us out of Egypt. Even though it says hamotzi, it's still past tense. So, achinami de pashehu. So Rav Kahana disagrees with Rish Lakish, and he says that when it says haposhim bi, it really just means that they sinned in the past against me, they do not continue to sin. Okay, so he disagrees with Rish Lakish's drasha. V'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, and says Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, shlosha psachim yesh to Gehenim. Interesting, there are 3 entranceways to Gehenim, to hell. Echad b'midbar, v'echad b'yam, v'echad b'Yerushalayim. One of them is in the desert, the other one is in the sea, and the other one is in Jerusalem. B'midbar dichsiv, in the desert, as it says in the context of Korach, vayerdu heim v'chol asher chaim shola, that they fell, them and all of, or they went down, descended, them and all that they have alive into hell, into the abyss. Okay, and that was in the desert. Bayam, in the sea, dichsiv mi beten shol shivati shamata koli. It says by Yonah that he was inside of the fish, and it says that from the stomach of hell, of the depths, I guess, of the abyss, I have called out, and you heard you will hear my voice. So we see that in the sea also there is an entrance to hell. B'Yerushalayim dichsev, and also in Jerusalem, as it says, Ne'um Hashem asher urlo b'tzion v'tanu lo b'Yerushalayim, right? The word of God that there is a fire for him in Zion and an oven in Jerusalem. V'tanu d'vei Rabbi Yishmael, they learned the Besmedrash Rabbi Yishmael, asher urlo b'tzion, that there's a fire to him in Zion, zo Gehenim. This is hell. V'tanu lo b'Yerushalayim, and there's an oven in Jerusalem, so pischa shel Gehenim. This is the entrance to hell. Okay? V'suleka, there's no other entrances. V'amar Reb Marian, Amar Reb Yeshua ben Levi. Reb Marian said the name of Reb Yeshua ben Levi. V'amar, those who say Tana Rabba bar Marian b'divei Reb Yochanan ben Zakkai. Now, friends, this is super interesting, right? Those who say that Rabba bar Marian taught in the Bay Reb Yochanan ben Zakkai. What is the Bay Reb Yochanan ben Zakkai? Remember, who is Reb Yochanan ben Zakkai? Early Tana, right? The teacher of Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer, right? He was like the grandfather Tana. So says Rashi, B'divei Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Braisa shenizdo beveis midrasho kein tosefta shesider Reb Chiya Reb Oshaya. That apparently already in the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, they organized some like Braisas, like authoritative Braisas, as Rashi says, similar to like Reb Chiya and Reb Oshaya collected the authoritative Braisas in the Tosefta, as we also saw in Gemara and Shabbos on which daf was that? Kuf Chaf Aleph from the Beis, maybe. That basically the brises that were collected by Reb Chiya and Reb Oshaya were considered authoritative. So apparently they weren't the first ones to do it. Already by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai they did that. Isn't that extremely interesting? Meaning, Rebbe organized things into the Mishnayos, and that's the Mishnayos that we have. He edited the Mishnayos, and that was considered to be a radical move, because he wrote down the Mishnayos and organized them for the first time He took Torah Sheba'al Peh, kind of organized them and put them in writing. Now at the same time, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshaya were collecting brises that were relevant, putting that in the Tosefta. Now, interestingly already though, like Rebbe was at the end of the Tanaim, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was at the beginning of the Tanaim, and already he was organizing brises and stuff. Maybe he didn't write it down, I don't know, but like, it's interesting to see how this, it didn't come out of nowhere that Rebbe kind of made the Mishnayos. Already we're saying that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was already organizing the brises and things, that maybe wasn't writing it down, I don't know, but already there was some kind of organization of all the traditions, I guess, happening already for a few generations at least. Very, very interesting stuff. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says that there are these two palm trees in the Gei Ben Hinnom, and there is smoke that comes between these palm trees. And these are what we're talking about in Masechta Sukkah when it says that Sinei Har Barzel you can use as a lulav, meaning if you use the palm branches from the palm, whatever, like the lulav part from these palm trees, it is kishera, it's referring to these palm trees in Gei Ben Hinnom, that there is smoke coming out between them. This is V'zoi Pischa Shel Gehenim, this is the opening to Gehenim, to hell. Dilma Hanu di Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, yeah, but maybe it's not a separate entrance to hell. Maybe this is the reference to the entrance to hell in Jerusalem, is this one by Gei Ben Hinnom. Okay? Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi zayin shemus yesh legehenim. Says Rabbi Shua ben Levi that there are 7 names for hell. These are them: Sheol v'Avadon, uve'er shachas uvor she'on v'tita yavin, v'tzalmavis v'eretz hatachtis. Those are the 7 names for hell. Sheol dichsiv, mi beten Sheol shivati shamata koli. So we know that Sheol is the name of hell, as it says by Yonah, that he called out from God from Sheol. Okay? Avadon, dichsev, ayisuba b'kever chazdecha emunascha ba'avadon. Will it be said, your kindness from Avadon, which is a reference to hell. Be'er shachas, dichsev, kilosaz of nafshi lishol ositin chasidcha leo shachas, that David Melech says that you will not give my soul to the abyss, you will not give your chassid to see shachas, reference to hell. Uvor she'on v'titayavin, dichsev, vaya'alein mi bor she'on v'titayavin, that he's taken me out from Bor She'on and Titayavin, which is a reference to hell. V'tzamaves, dichsev yosh v'choshech v'tzamaves, those who sit in darkness and hell, I guess. Beretz atachtis gemaru. Beretz atachtis is a tradition. V'suleka, there's no other names for for hell. Ve'ike Gehenim, what about Gehenim? Isn't that a name of hell? No, it's not a name of hell, it's a description of hell. Geisha amuka ki Gehenim. It's like, it's a ki Gei Hinnom. Okay. It is like a valley that is as deep as the valley of Hinnom. Okay. Shakol yored la al iske Hinnom. That everybody goes there because of things related to Hinnom, which apparently is like arayos or chinam, maybe for no reason, maybe because they do like silly things. Okay. Veika tafta. What about tafta? Dichsiv ki aruch me esmo tafta. That tafta has already been organized from yesterday. It's a reference to like this, like burning of wood and stuff in the context of Ashur, I believe. Hahu shekol mispata b'yitzro yipol sham. So also, it's not exactly, and tafta isn't a name of hell. It's just describing that it's the people who are mitpate b'yitzro, who are overcome by their Yetzer Hara end up therein. Gan Eden Amr Rish Lakish in Be'eretz Yisrael Beis Shan Pischo. So when it comes to Gan Eden, Rish Lakish says that if there is an entrance to Gan Eden in Eretz Yisrael, well then it's by Beis Shan. Apparently because they have very delicious fruits. You guys must hear that siren. So if the entrance to Gan Eden, to paradise, is in Israel, it must be in Beit Shan. Ve'i be'Aravya Beis Gerem. Okay, if it's in Aravya, then it's Beis Gerem Pischo is where the entrance to Gan Eden is. Ben Anaharos who do Maskinen Pischo. If it's between the rivers, I think that's like if it's between the rivers, then that's like Iraq, so that would be by Dumaskinen, would be the opening. Bebavel, Abai Mishtabech Beper de Me'ever Yemina, Rav Mishtabech Beper de Arpania. Now in Bavel, So Abaye said that the fruits of the right side, which apparently is like the southern side of the Tigris or something, is like really good fruit. So that's probably where the entrance to Gan Eden is. Rava would say that there was really good fruit in Harpanya. So I guess that would be the entrance to Gan Eden. So I guess find the place with the good fruits, and that's where the entrance to Gan Eden is. Okay, what about Ginosar? Remember those Peiros Ginosar from Sechta Brachas? Was it Daf Mem Daled? Those apparently were good fruits. Okay, Chevra, Ayruvin is back. Uvenein kimlo shtei v'chulei. So we said that the space in between these gaps in the pasei bayraos are enough for 2 teams of oxen, and there's machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about are these 2 teams comprised of 3 oxen each or 4 oxen each? Okay. Now we also said that they have to be tied up and they can't be loose. So pshita, isn't that obvious? Kevin the Tanale dikshuris havu aninadinan dilo havu mutaros. No, if the Mishnah already said that the teams of oxen were tied, well then obviously then they weren't free ranging. So mahu detema kshuris ke'ein kshuris aval mamish lo kamash malan v'lo mutaros. I may have thought to say that what it means tied is that they weren't mamish tied. It was like they were tied. Maybe they were close together, but they don't actually mamish have to be tied. So kamash malan v'lo mutaros, that they were not free. Kilu, they were mamish tied. Okay. Achas nechneses v'achas yotzes. So there has to be enough space for one of these teams to be going in, one of these teams to be going out. Tana rivaka nechneses v'rivaka yotzes. So what it means is that it's the teams that are going in and out, not individual cows going in and out. Okay. Tana rabban kama rosh of ruba shel para shtei amos. When the Mishnah says that the minimum size of the space for the pasei bayraos is enough for the entire head and most of the body of a cow to get into there in order to drink water. So how much do we assume in sort of absolute terms? How large is the head and most of the body of a cow? So shtei amos, the answer is 2 amos. So basically there has to be 2 amos of space from outside of the well, so that you can put some water in a bucket there and let the cows drink. Fine. Now, what is the width of a para, right? If we're saying that the size of the gap is enough for 2 teams of either 3 or 4 cows, so what is the width of each cow? So we can figure out in absolute terms how many amos we're talking about. So, amma v'shnei shlishe amma. The answer is 1 2/3 amos. So according to Rabbi Meir, who says that we're talking about 3 of these in each team, so then each team is 5 amos, and there are 2 of them, so it's 10 amos. Whereas according to Rabbi Yehuda, there are 4 in each, so each one is going to be 6 2/3. Multiplied by 2 is going to be 13 1/3 amos of space. So now the Gemara says, Shein ke'eser divrei Meir, that according to Meir, it's like 10 amos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kishloshes amma ucha arba esrei amma. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says it's like 13 amos and like 14 amos. Now the Gemara wants to understand what's all this like this amount of amos. Like give us real numbers. Ke'eser ha'eser havyon. What do you mean that according to Rabbi Meir it's like 10 amos? It's mamish 10 amos, right? 3 times 1 2/3 is 5 times 2 is 10. So mishum debay the misna seifa kishlosh esrei. So it says like 10 because it was going to say like 13. Kishlosh esrei tvei avyon. What do you mean it's like 13? It's not. It's more than 13. It's 13 1/3. Mishum debay the misna kaiba esrei. Well, because it needed to say like 14. Kaiba esrei halo havya. What do you mean it's like 14? It's less than 14. It's 13 1/3. Okay, so Amar of Papa Yisayis al shlosh esrei ben magios laiba esrei. Yeah, what it means is that kilu, it's like 13, it's like 14 because it's neither one. It's more than 13, less than 14. It's 13 1/3. Okay, zeu. So basically, what do we learn from all this? We learned that according to Reb Meir, the gap allowed in the pasei bayraos is 10 amos. According to Reb Yehuda, it is 13 1/3 amos. Okay. Amar of Papa. Okay, this is arguably interesting. Amar of Papa. Bebor shmona d'chuliyama lo plige de lo ba'inan pshutin. Bebor shtemisrei d'chuliyama lo plige de ba'inan pshutin. Remember, there was a machlokas in our Mishnah between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about is all you need these pasei bayraos, is all you need these L-shaped walls in each of the 4 corners and that's enough? Or, like Rabbi Meir says, do you need to actually put an additional, board in the middle? right? So you have the four corners, and then on each wall, in the middle, there's another one of these boards. Meir said you need another one of these boards. Now, Rav Papa points out that he doesn't say that in all cases. It depends. So now, if we're talking about where the well itself had a diameter of 8 amos, okay? It sounds like maybe it's complicated, but it really isn't that complicated. So if the well itself has a diameter of 8 amos, i.e. it's 8 amos big, okay? Now we said that the pasei bayraos have to be large enough that a cow, Rosh of Rubo, can get in. We said that is 2 amos. So basically, if on either side, on all sides essentially of the well, there's an additional 2 amos, so the 8 amos for the well, plus an additional 2 amos on each side, so that's 12 amos, right? Now, so basically the square area around it is going to be a square that's 12 amos by 12 amos. Now, we said that there is 1 amma of wall in each of these diomdin, right? Which means that each of the 4 walls has 2 amos of wall, right? One from each one of the diomids, and they're in the 4 corners. So every wall essentially has 2 amos of wall, 10 amos of space. So what Rav Papa is saying is that, as long as the well is 8 amos in diameter or less, well then everyone's going to agree that you don't need any additional help by these boards in the middle. Even Rav Meir would say you don't have to put up a board, because even without the board in the middle, you have 10 amos or less of space, right? Again, if the well is 8 amos in diameter, add another 4 for the 2 amos on either side of the well, which you get 12, but then you subtract 2 amos because there's already 1 amma from each of the corners on each of the sides. So each wall just has 10 amos of gap. And everyone agrees that that's fine, so you don't need any extra help. And everyone also agrees that if the diameter of the well is 12 amos, well then when you add the 2 amos on either side, so you get to 16 amos, right? So then then you subtract 2 amos because that's the wall that you have. So then you have 14 amos of gap. Now everyone also agrees that 14 amos of gap is too much, because even Rabbi Yehuda only says that you're allowed 13 and a third. Right, so 14 is too much. So everyone agrees that if it's 8 amos or less, that you don't need extra help from the middle board, and right, even Rabbi Meir. And everyone also agrees that if the diameter of the well is 12 amos or more, well then you're going to need support. Even Rabbi Yehuda, because he says that the maximum is 13 and a third, and by 12 amos, it's already going to be 14 amos of gap. So everyone is going to agree that you need help. It's really, but in that space between 8 amos and 12 amos, where you get to this middle space where the gap is going to be more than 10 amos, but less than 13 and a third amos. Okay. So Meir says that you need that middle one, and Rabbi Yehuda says that you don't. So Amar Rav Papa, bebor shmona d'cholyam lo pligei d'lo ba'inan pshutin. So Rav Papa says, look, if the well has a diameter of 8 amos or less, everyone agrees that you're not going to need any extra boards. And if the diameter of the well is 12, well then everyone agrees that you're going to need some extra support. So the machlokas is from 8, when the diameter of the well is between 8 and 12 amos. The Rab Meir ba'inan pshutin, Rab Yehuda lo ba'inan pshutin. That according to Rab Meir, you're going to need these extra boards in the middle, whereas according to Rab Yehuda, you don't, because according to Rab Meir, it's going to be more than 10 amos. Rab Yehuda is going to say as long as it's less than 13 and a third, that would be fine. For Rav Papa, my kamashmal and tanina. Now the Gemara asks, what's Rav Papa teaching us? Like we already know this from our Mishnah, right? That Rab Meir says that the width that's allowed is 2 teams of 3 cows each. Rabbi Yehuda says 2 teams of 4 cows each, and we know that the width of a cow is 1 2/3. So, what's Rav Papa adding to the conversation that we couldn't have figured out on our own? So the Gemara answers. So Rav Papa brisa lo shmiya leva kamash malon kebrisa. Rav Papa never heard of that brisa that told us that the width of a cow is 1 2/3. So he was, as far as he knew, he was making this chiddush to tell us that the amount of space that a cow takes up is 1 2/3, so that when you add everything together, Reb Meir's opinion is 10 amos and Reb Yehuda's opinion is 13 1/3 amos, because after all, that wasn't explicit in the Mishnah. So Reb Papa didn't hear that brisa, which said that they're 1 2/3, and he thought that he was telling us this information for the first time. Okay. Says the Gemara, again, another one of these mnemonics, Aruch Yoser Betel Chitzas Chatzer Shibsha Simen. Great. Fine. So Abaye asks a kasha from his Rebbe, Rabba. Interestingly, Abaye also grew up in the household of Rabba. That's Rabba bar Nachmani, and sometimes we call Abaye Nachmani. So Abaye asked Rabba, Herich b'diyomdin kashir pshutin Reb Meir Mau. So Reb Meir in our Mishnah had talked about assuming that you need these boards, assuming that the space between the diyomdin is more than 10 amos. So according to Reb Meir, he said that, well, what you do is you take a board and you put it in the middle of the wall, and like that, you have less than 10 amos from, of gap at any point. So the question is, according to Reb Meir, does that board need to be mamish in the middle of the gap, or what if you just extend the board? What if you extend the diomad so that there's no longer 10 amos of gap, right? So let's say it's, according to Reb Meir, let's say the diameter of the well is 9 amos, which means that there's 11 amos of gap. So what if instead of putting a board in the middle of that gap, you kind of just extend the diomad by another amma, so that now there's 10 amos of gap, which is permitted? Would Rabbi Meir say that that's okay? Or do we dafka need that the board be in the middle of the gap? That's what Rabbi Meir wants. So that's what Abai is asking Rabba. So herich b'diomdin kashir pshutin Rabbi Meir Mau. If instead of putting that board in the middle, he just extended the diomed, what would Rabbi Meir say that that's acceptable? Amrle. So Rabbi said, Tinisua, no, buy it. We already know that from a brisa. Or in this case, I think our Mishnah. Right? It says that you can make the pasei bayraos as large as you want. You can make that area as large as you want, as long as you increase the amount of these pasin, accordingly. So Rabbi wants to make the argument of, if you are medayik in the words, what does it mean? Sheyarbe bipasin, my lab, the mayach b'diomdin. It means that you're being marbe bipasin, like the pas itself, you are making longer, you are making bigger. So we would see that if you analyze the words used in the Mishnah, it's talking about actually increasing the size of the diomdin. So certainly Reb Meir would say that would be acceptable, that you would be allowed to increase the size of the diomdin until there is 10 amas or less of space. So Gemara says, "Lo, don't make that diuk. Demapish v'avid pshutin." No, what it means is, what does it mean? Sheyarbe b'pasin. It means that you add a lot of these pasin, you add a lot of these boards, but you wouldn't be able to extend the diomdin. If that's the case, but if that's the case, that it's talking about just having lots of these boards, well then why does it say achayarbe bipasin, which Rabbi wants to argue means that he makes the diomdin themselves bigger? What it should say is achayarbe pasin, until you add more individual boards. But it doesn't say that. So the Gemara says, yeah, but tani achayarbe pasin. Fine, so then just say achayarbe pasin. But the point is that it means increasing boards. Don't make the diuk to say that it means increasing the board. And if it means that you have to learn achayarbe bipasin as meaning achayarbe pasin, that's fine. Great. So you're gonna add individual boards. Fine. So Ikadam, to those who explain this discussion between Abai and Rabba slightly differently, Amalei Tinisua. So Rabba said, no, we already learned in our Mishnah bipasin, as long as you increase the pasin. So my lab the mapish vaviv pshutin. So Rabba wants to argue the opposite. In this Ikadam, Rabba is arguing the opposite to Abai. He's saying, Abai, the Mishnah said that you increase the pasin. What that means is that you are increasing the number of these individual boards, i.e. in the middle of the wall, but not increasing the diomdin. Lo, demarich b'diomdin. No, it means that you're actually increasing the size of the diomdin. Hachinami mistavra, and this actually makes sense because you can be medayik in the Mishnah. It says, you can increase the size of the pasei bayraos as long as you increase the size of the diomdin, right? Bipasin, the existing diomdin. Okay, so it's certainly not conclusive either way what Reb Meir would say regarding can you increase the size of the diomdin, or do you dafka need to put it in the middle? Arguments can be made both ways. Fine. So now Abaye asks the kasha to Rabba regarding Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, right? Because whereas Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah said that these pasin, that these boards that you're going to put dafka go in the middle, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't say that. All he says is that you put the 4 diomdin in the corners. And then we learned that that there's a maximum size of 13 and a third. So what happens if the gap is more than that? So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're going to have to make it smaller. The question is, he doesn't say how to do it. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, would you make the gap smaller by increasing the size of the diomdin, or can you put it in the middle, like Rabbi Meir says? Now the chiddush of putting it in the middle is that, remember the halacha of when there's more space on either side of a like korah, or in this case this pasin, the space on both sides can kind of nullify the board. So in this case also, if you're taking this pas that's 1 amma wide, and there's a whole bunch of ammas of gap on either side, maybe it'll be as if the gap the board doesn't exist. So maybe Rabbi Yehuda would argue that davka, if the gap is more than 13 and a third, you would have to increase the size of the diomdin. So that's what we're trying to find out. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, if the gap is larger than 13 and a third, according to Rabbi Yehuda, how do you make that smaller? Pshutin of it, or b'diomdim ma'arich? Or, does he say that you can just add pshutin, add these boards, or do you have to increase the size of the diomdin? So again, Rabbi says, look, we have a brisa to teach it. Now this is a brisa. There's going to be a lot of the content in this brisa is going to be very similar to our Mishnah, but the end is slightly different, and it just adds a little bit extra, which is going to be valuable for us. So Rabbi says, look, we learn the answer to your query in a brisa. Kamein mikoravin, how close, how small, what is the minimum size of the area surrounding this well? So, of the pasei bayraos, kedei rosh of ruba shalpar. The answer is, as long as a head and most of the body of a cow can get in there to drink, that would be the minimum size of the pasei bayraos. And we said that was 2 amos on every side. And how large, what's the maximum size of the pasei bayraos, of the area in the pasei bayraos? So, afilu kor, va'afilu koraim. It can be basically unlimited in size. Even the size of a kor or a koraim, which we said is 30 or 60 sa'ah, meaning 1 kor is 30 sa'ah, koraim is 60 sa'ah, that's quite a lot. Usually we've been talking about maximums of 2 sa'ah. This is 30 or 60. That's quite large. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer beis sa'asayim mutter, Yosem beis sa'asayim also. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says he's more conservative, and he says you can only have a maximum size of the pasei bayraos of 2 sa'ah. So Amlo Rabbi Yehuda, so they said to Rabbi Yehuda, Iyata moda bedir v'sar umuktzeh v'chotzer afilu bas 5 korim afilu bas 10 korim shemuter nu Rabbi Yehuda. Don't you admit that when it comes to what did we say these things are called? A fold or a corral, or a backyard or a front yard, meaning these areas that are a reshus hayachid, that is made for diur, that is made for living in, for inhabiting. So we say they could you can, as long as they're enclosed, they could be any size, even 5 kor or 10 kor, essentially unlimited in size, right? When we say that there's a maximum of a beis sa'asayim, that's for like a karpaf, that's for an area that isn't for living in. But if you live in it, then it can be any size. And here also, this pasei bayraos, you're building it for drinking. Drinking is something that you usually do in an inhabited space. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda, shouldn't you admit that the pasei bayraos can be basically however big that you want them to be? Right, so Amar Loyan, so Rabbi Yehuda responded to them, Zo mechitza ve'elu pasin. What's Rabbi Yehuda's response? He says, yeah, but it's different. By your backyard and your front yard, whatever that is, where it can be as large as you want, there your mom is building walls. Here, you're just building, like these diomdin in the corners and then filling it in with like a bunch of random boards. So that's very different, and therefore, it's not as significant of a wall. And even though it's a chiddush that you can create it in the first place, but it can't be larger than 2 beis sa'ah. Now, what Rabba wants to be medayik from this dialogue is that, what does Rabbi Yehuda respond? What's Rabbi Yehuda's rationale for why he says that there's a maximum of 2 sa'ah for the size of this pasei bayraos? He says it's because, after all, it's not really much of a wall, it's really just these boards. Now, if that's the case, if Rabbi Yehuda said that you can make the pasei bayraos by extending the diomdin until there is less than 13 and a third, well, in the example of like this very large pasei bayraos, if you're gonna make that space smaller by extending the diomdin until there's only 13 and a third of gap or less, well, you're pretty much going to have quite a large wall over there. It's pretty much going to be almost entirely wall. So why would Rabbi Yehuda say that the pasei bayraos is different than a large rishus hayachid, in that pasei bayraos is mostly these planks? That really wouldn't be the case if he was saying that you can decrease the gap by making the diomid larger, because in that case, it's really mostly going to be wall. So the Gemara says, yeah, but that's not necessarily a good proof, because Hachi Ka'amar, this, you can argue that this is what Rabbi Yehuda is saying to them, Zotoras mechitza alei ufritosea be'eser, that the difference between the pasei bayraos and a regular rishus hayachid is that a regular rishus hayachid, it has walls, and those walls are considered breached, are considered problematic if there is a gap larger than 10 amos. Whereas ve'elu toras pasan aleinu fritzosein b'shloshes amos shlish. Whereas these walls of the pasei bayraos, even if they are mostly enclosed, nonetheless they have the status of just regular boards, because they can have a breach up to 13 and a third, which makes them kind of less significant than a full-fledged rishus hayachid, and therefore there will be a maximum of a base sa'asayim for the maximum size of these pasei bayraos, and therefore we cannot necessarily bring as a proof either way to say whether Rabbi Yehuda would require pasin or extending the diomdin. It could really be, you can argue either way. Ba'amine Abaye me Rabba, Abaye asked Rabba, tell him islakit asara mitoch arba nidon mishum diomed o eno nishon mishum diomed. What if you have this well? Now surrounding the well, you don't have 4 diomdin, rather you have 4 little mounds, or maybe 3 diomdin in a mound, whatever it is. But the point is, certainly at least one of them is a mound. Now, what's interesting about this mound is that it climbs to a height of 10 tfachim within a slope of 4 amos. Okay? So the mound, it has a slope of, I don't know, I haven't learned slopes in a while, but basically this mound increases up in height up to 10 amos within slope, I guess, of 4 amos. Not tfachim, but amos, okay? So as long as it hits that identifier, which we actually learned in Masechta Shabbos, so it would be considered a 10 tefach area, and it would actually even be considered a rishus ha-yachid, as long as it is 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. So we want to say, can it count as a diomed? So Amalei Tinisua, so Rabba said, look, I could bring you a similar brisa which can have bearings on your question, which is Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Haisasham Evan Mu'ubas. So what if you have a pasei bayraos, and over there was a stone, and the stone is square, and it's 10 tfachim tall. So Roin kol she'ilu techalek v'yesh ba amal lechan v'amal lechan nidon mishum diomed v'mlav eno nidon mishum diomed. So Reb Shimon ben Elazar says, look, since we're talking about a stone that is square and it's 10 tfachim tall, so as long as if you would be able to cut it so that there would be 1 amma, basically an L shape with 1 amma in each direction, well then, beseder, even though currently it's square, but as long as you're able to theoretically carve it into, to shape it into a diomed, so that would be acceptable. Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, Haisasham Evan Agula. So Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka has a little bit of more of a chiddush, which is if the stone was not square, but rather it was round. So Roin kol sheilu techalek techakek v'techalek v'yesh ba'amal lechan nidon mishum diomed v'mlav eno mishum diomed. So in Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka's example, there is one additional step, because he's talking about a round stone. So for the circular stone, what you would have to do is first you would have to shape it into a square, and then once it's shaped into a square, you would have to then shape it into a diomed, into this L shape. Now again, we're not talking about actually shaping them. It's ki'ilu, if you were to shape it into a diomed, what would you have to do? And in this case, since it's round in shape, you'd have to first shape it into a square and then shape it into diomedin. And Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka is okay with that. He says, look, as long as after you've shaped it into a square and then into diomedin, it would have the proper size. So then you can consider this circular stone to be diomedin, to be proper diomedin for this pasei bayraos. But if you wouldn't have the proper dimensions after your shaping, so then it would not count as pasei bayraos. So, what is the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan ben Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar? So the answer is, Ma'asavar chad roin aminan, trei roin lo aminan, u'ma'asavar afilu trei roin nami aminan. Whereas, so Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, look, you're allowed to say chad roin, meaning again, we're not actually doing anything to these stones. We're just imagining as if we did something to the stone. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, look, if the stone is square, in which case you only have to imagine one thing, which is chopping it into a diomed. So we say, look, as long as you can imagine chopping it into a diomed, and it would have an amma in each direction, so that would be acceptable. But once we're talking about a round stone, where first you would have to chop it into a square and only then be able to chop it into diomed, he says that's too much and we wouldn't be able to use that. And therefore, in the case of our mound, which is round, so then he would say that you cannot use the mound as a diomed. However, according to Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, who says that by a round stone, you can do two row-ins. We could say, first we can imagine that we crafted this round stone into a square stone, and then we can imagine that we made it into diomed. That's all fine. So here also by our mound, we can imagine that you first make it square and then you make it into diomed, and that would be acceptable. So Rabbi was telling Abai, look, whatever the maskana is in the Gemara, in the machlokas, by these stones, the same would be for the mound. Abai asked Rabbi, chitzas hakonim, if you have a bunch of reeds, if you have a bunch of reeds, and each one of these reeds is within 3 tefachim of each other, and they form an L, okay? So he wants to know, can you use that as diomedin? So even though in general we say, of course, it would be lavud, but the chiddush is that pasei bayraos in and of themselves are a chiddush, and that they could be parutz mubala omed. So can we join that with another chiddush of lavud to say that you can even employ lavud to create diomedin for pasei bayraos? So nidom mishum diomed olav. So Rabbi said, Tim tinisua, look, we have a brayso, hayasham ilan ogader ochitza sakanim nidom mishum diomed. If you have over there in the corner a fence, a tree or a fence, or these chitza sakanim, right, these reeds, well, nidom mishum diomed, we could treat it as diomed. Okay, my love, kane pachos mishlosha. So Rabbi wants to say, what does it mean? What are these chitza sakanim? It means that you have a bunch of reeds that are within 3 tefachim of each other. And we're saying that it works. So the Gemara says, lo, gudrisa dekane. You can argue that it's not talking about reeds that are 3 tefachim from each other. It means there's some kind of a tree that has these like things poking out of it, sticking out of it. And that's what the chitza sakanim are. And they're saying, look, you can kind of shape that into a diomed, and we're saying that that's acceptable. But it doesn't necessarily have a bearing for reeds that are 3 tefachim from each other. If that's the case, hanu ilan. Well, if we're talking about a tree that has these things sticking out of it, well, then that's the same thing as a tree. And we already learned tree, right? The Brisa said 3 things: a tree, a fence, or this chitza sakanim. Ve'elamai kana pachus mishlosha. But so then the Gemara says, yeah, but what's your other alternative to say that it's reeds that are within 3 tefachim of each other? Hanu gader. That's the same thing as a fence. So elam ma'islach l'meimar tregavne gader. So what are you going to have to say if we're going to say that it's talking about the reeds are less than 3 tefachim away? So you're going to have to say that there are 2 types of fences, and this is one type of fence, a lavud fence. Achanami tregavne ilan. So you could say the same thing over here, that it's actually talking about this tree that has these like things sticking out of it, and we're saying that you could treat that as a diomed, and what about the fact that it already says Elon in that brisa? There are two different types of trees. So, okay, the Gemara right now wants to say that this brisa isn't talking about reeds that are 3 tvachim from each other. Rather, it's talking about some kind of interestingly shaped tree, but there's no bearing for using reeds that are less than 3 tvachim from each other for diomdin. Okay, but now the Gemara is about to say the opposite, which is gurdisa dekani kami bayale. There are those who say that Abaye was asking Rabba about these trees with like the things sticking out. Can you use that for diomdin? Gurdisa dekani mai. Can you use these interestingly shaped trees? Amrle Tinisua, he says, look, we have a brisa, ayasham gader o ilan o chitza sakanim. If you had over there by the diomdin in the corners a fence or a tree or these chitza sakanim, nidon mishum diomid, you could treat it as diomdim, my love, gordisa dekane. What it means is this interesting kind of tree, and we're saying that you can use it for diomdin. So lo, kana pachus mishlosha, no, I'll argue that it's talking about where you have reeds that are within 3 tvachim of each other. Yachi anu gader, if so, then that's the same thing as a fence. Ve'elamai, gudrisa dekane, but what? Alternatively, you're going to say that this brisa is talking about this interestingly shaped tree with the thing sticking out that we want to use as diomdin. So hanu ilan, that's the same thing as tree. So elamai yislach l'meimer, trei gavne ilan. Rather, what you're going to have to say, if you want to say that it's talking about this interestingly shaped tree, that there are two kinds of trees. So hachanami trei gavne gader. So rather say over here that also it's talking about these reeds that are within 3 tvachim of each other, and it just means, what, you're going to say that it's a fence? Okay, there's two types of fences. Say it, so I guess it's inconclusive either way, if this brisa could be a proof for lovewood by diomdin or not. Okay, fine. Chevra, so that was the Yud Tes of Masechta Ayruvin. Now, we started off, basically the first Amud was a continuation of the agadatas that we began yesterday. I think mostly kind of dealing with hell and stuff. Alright. And then we talked about the dimensions of the pasei bayraos, right? The minimum size is going to be enough for the head and most of the body of a cow to get in there, and that is 2 amos. And then we talked about how large the gaps can be. So we said that each cow in our cheshbon of the teams of cows is 1 2/3 amos wide. And Reb Meir said we're talking about 2 teams of 3 cows, so it comes to a total of 10 amos width of gap. And according to Buddha, that would be 13 1/3 amos of gap. And then Abaye started asking Rabba all sorts of interesting questions about pasei bayraos that I think in the end they were pretty much mostly inconclusive. So, all right, Chevra, that was the Yud Tes. Hope you enjoyed. Have a great day. Peace.